Bokaro is a steel city, as you mentioned, and steel is like the salt of all infrastructure, right? Back in the 60s, when the government of India was developing the post-independence era India, steel was at the heart of it. I really loved studying. Like I said, I loved writing notes while studying. So I learned that I had to figure it out on my own. With my parents' guidance and some help, I started writing with my left hand. I did all of my daily activities.
What drove your interest in inclusion and access for disabled individuals? Was rural India giving you a little more information about the inequities that existed for people with disabilities?
Hi, I'm your host Pamela from Bangalore, India, and you're tuned into Season 2 of Transition Story. You're about to hear an enriching story driven by self-belief, passion, a lot of resilience, and personal growth. I'm so excited to welcome our next guest to the show.
At just 16 years, chronic pain condition of her wrist impacted her ability to use the right hand for writing or other chores. After visiting numerous doctors and hospitals, she finally found healing at CMC Vellore. The care and dedication Anumeha experienced here inspired her to pursue her undergraduate degree in physiotherapy at the same institution. Driven by a commitment to advocate for inclusion and access for people with disabilities, she transitioned to a non-profit sector before completing her MBA at ISB Hyderabad. During her studies, she received the inaugural Parmeshwar Godrej Award for social impact and the Young Leaders Award for her significant contributions to her graduating cohort and the school. Her unwavering passion for promoting inclusion and accessibility in healthcare has guided her entire career. She now harnesses technology to address these challenges at a global scale, currently leading the neurology vertical at Qure.ai, a pioneering health tech startup specializing in AI imaging products across 80 countries. I just cannot wait to dive into Anumeha's phenomenal journey, learn about her challenges, and see what's the next chapter of her life. Hey, hi Anumeha, welcome to the show.
Hi, Pamela. So happy to be here.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to be able to host you. You are one of the first guests from the healthcare segment who has transitioned into technology. So, this is a great story for me to cover.
Absolutely. Happy to share my story and also really happy to just have a conversation with you on this Sunday morning.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Anumeha, we will start with your early life. Growing up in Bokaro, as I introduced you to the audience, you faced a chronic condition that affected your ability to write as a teen. How did that experience of being limited at that young age shape your perspective and make you the person you are today?
Thanks. Thank you for the question. Going back to the start, Bokaro is a steel city, as you mentioned, and steel is like the salt of all infrastructure, right? Back in the 60s, when the government of India was developing the post independence era India, steel was at the heart of it.
Yes.
Took the help of a lot of foreign institutions to establish steel giants like Bokaro that solved not just for the growing infrastructural needs of the country, but also provided massive employment. So, growing up in Bokaro was like living in a large community where all your fathers worked in the same steel plant and the children had similar lives. I loved studying. I learned Kathak, did swimming, badminton with my parents, and I had a lot of friends in my society to play with every evening. Not very different from the rest of the children in Bokaro. Although this condition that you mentioned, that threw a wrench in this very beautiful flow of life. I developed a repetitive stress injury syndrome called decurvent stenosynovitis. What it simply means is because I did a lot of writing with my right hand, my thumb got impacted with a chronic syndrome which causes so much pain in the thumb that you can't hold a pen, you can't hold a spoon, you can't brush. And because it is not treated well in time, it worsens to be a continuous pain. So you can't do any daily life activities with your right hand.
Oh my God.
And yeah, at the moment it seems easier to share, but as you can imagine, through the course of my life at
I
that
can,
time,
of course.
we went around the country to the best of hospitals looking for a diagnosis and a treatment. But I did not get that very right away. When doctors weren't sure, they even said things like, your daughter doesn't want to study, so she's coming up with excuses.
Yeah, that's a usual limited belief that people
Really?
throw at you.
Yeah, but that was far from reality. I was a good student. I really loved studying. Like I said, I loved writing notes while studying. So I learned that I had to figure it out on my own. With
Mm.
my parents' guidance and some help, I started writing with my left hand. I did all of
Oh,
my daily activities with that hand. Learned to play table tennis, a new sport, with my left hand. Couldn't play badminton, so I needed something. I still can't play table tennis with my right. I can only play it with my
okay.
left.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
And at the time, nobody had a laptop, but my parents got me a laptop. So I used the speech to text feature to document things that I was reading to remember them. So a lot of fun things I did to keep up. I took a writer for my board exam, so I had to narrate complicated biology terms to an economics student so that
Oh my
I could just
God.
get through my boards. So yeah, it was life altering. It wasn't until I reached Christian Medical College Vellore, an apex institute in the south of India in Tamil Nadu, that I found a diagnosis and a plan of treatment. But what I also found was an institution with excellent ethos and brilliant people that it created, and I was left in awe of that institution. This was my first exposure to healthcare, as
Mm.
you'd imagine, right? It came with its challenges, but what I learned was that a brilliant institution like CMC could completely change the path for patients like myself. That was my first big learning and takeaway from this experience. The second was that disability, and I use the
Mm.
word disability even though it seems like a very small thing to not be able to use your thumb. I understood how it impacts the course of one's life. And just a
Yeah.
thumb. As a young girl, I used to imagine what happens to people who can't use their whole body, who are in a wheelchair,
Mm.
what happens to their families. And especially when they come from difficult backgrounds, not as privileged as we are, how
Yes.
did they find the right healthcare institution? What about those who couldn't even get to a CMC? So I started my life thinking about the pertinent accessibility issues that impact people with disabilities in the country
Mm.
because of my own experience. And this each became the foundation of my entry into healthcare. That's sort of what I took away from this incident that happened early on in my life.
Oh my God, it is so inspirational. I was getting goosebumps to hear this. As a child, you had this vision in your mind that I have to do something about it. And, we experience a lot of things in our daily life, but how many kids really think about how this experience is shaping their entire personality? So for you, this was like life altering. I've heard some of my friends in school, I had heard that they had peripheral neuropathy. I did not know what it meant, but I definitely knew it was some sort of disability with their hand. And some of them actually chose to drop out. So, that's the kind of experience people go through, but you kind of challenged that situation. I would also applaud your parents for making that investment in you in terms of believing in what challenge you're facing and trying to work around it. That speech to text in those days is like very early, I would say. Not many people would have imagined that this could be a solution.
Yeah, everybody thought I got a laptop to watch movies, but I was exploring the early format of speech to text, which, like you said, wasn't as technologically advanced as what we even have on our phones today. But yeah, it was all the support, like you said, from my family and my friends that made me look at that differently and power through.
Yeah, it's of course the support is a major part of it, but I would still give a lot of credit to your own, resilience and your inner drive that kept you going. I've learned about a lot of famous people like Stephen Hawking's. He had motor neuron disease. Elton John had epilepsy. So some of these famous personalities have fought back their disabilities and they have risen in life. So I'm so glad to meet somebody in real life that I can speak to who has gone through a very similar journey and getting an opportunity to learn from you. So that brings me to my next question. Your time at CMC, you started studying there and you got engaged in some rural work. What drove your interest in inclusion and access for disabled individuals? Was rural India giving you a little more information about the inequities that existed for people with disabilities?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a little bit about CMC when I first
Mm.
entered it before
Mm.
I answer the rest of your question. When I first entered CMC as the hospital campus, I saw a signboard written in Bengali. And
Mm.
even, as a 17-year-old, I knew enough geography to know that Bengali is not a language spoken in Tamil Nadu. And it wasn't just Bengali, right? It was English, Hindi, Tamil, Bengali, sometimes Telugu, sometimes Malayalam. What I learned later on was that CMC as an institution was an absolute for inclusion and access for patients around not just the country, but for neighboring countries, for patients across languages, states,
Ah.
socioeconomic backgrounds. Everybody who came there was welcome, who was treated equitably. So not equally but equitably. If a rich person walks in, he gets the comfort he needs and treatment. If a really poor person walks in, he gets the same treatment but also gets counseling, support, stay support, food at a cheaper rate, and all of that. So that is what CMC was doing. It was an institute solving for access and inclusion as a large institution for more than 8,000 patients in a day. And that is where my journey of education started. My personal experience was working with patients with chronic disabilities. So, not just in rural India, like you mentioned, but also in urban poor setups, so in slums and so on.
Hmm.
But what chronic disabilities means is that you live with a disability for the rest of your life. Unlike a
Hmm.
fracture, which happens and it gets better in
Yeah.
the 6 weeks, if you have a disability that is permanent, so if you are on a wheelchair, you will live the rest of your life on that wheelchair. Or if you have a vision impairment, it is not getting better at the end of the month. That is a permanent disability. And I got an opportunity to work with such patients during my time at CMC. In the course, what I learned was that while I was doing a lot of brilliant things for them inside the institution or inside the walls of that rehabilitation setup with the help of CMC's education, I wasn't doing much for them after they got discharged, right?
Hmm.
And I learned through their personal stories that they were not going back to schools, going back to jobs that they deserved. They did not get the sports opportunities like everybody else. And that shook my core. Here I was thinking that I'm doing great service. Then I learned that that's not enough.
Yeah.
I'm sending
The
patients.
journey ends there for them. The
Yes,
good
the
part
journey ends.
ends there for them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so the best life they can have cannot be inside a rehab setup. It has to be the same life they came from when they go back home, or better, right? So, if, for example, there was a patient I remember goes really deep into my heart. He said he wanted to be a computer engineer, and for that he knew he
Hmm.
had to take computer science as a subject in his 11th and 12th. The computer lab in this rural school in Assam was on the first floor. Now, so
And he
this
cannot
child who
walk.
can't walk had his father carry this 25-30 kg son every day to the computer lab. And to your astonishment, you would say that the school didn't change the lab to ground floor. They just said, we don't like this arrangement of the student coming to class, so he'll have to drop the practical classes.
Oh my God. Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. This was one such story. I also learned that people who could have perfect jobs in corporates in the tech space, just because they were a wheelchair user, they did not get that job.
Hmm.
And just like this, so many opportunities were deprived of people on the account of their permanent disability. And it's not a matter of a few weeks, like the fracture. It was something
Yeah,
that they had to live for the rest of their lives because the society did not have tools and models to allow them to go back to a fully functional life. And
absolutely.
this was what really shaped my perspective, and I decided that I wanted to do more and beyond the rehab institute and not just within it. So not just from the rural setups, but from the urban setups and from everything that I saw at CMC, I decided to learn to do more and empower myself to do more for my patients.
Absolutely. No, there are policies around the rights of persons with disabilities, right? There is
Hmm.
so much of literature around what disabilities are covered, how
Hmm.
institutions are governed and obligated to honor these disabilities. But hearing the story, I can clearly say that there is little governance to, really monitor and see if organizations are following it. Because about 4% of India's population are people with disabilities, which is a huge number if you see. 2.5, 3 crore people are having disabilities, and we don't have a governance in place to manage this, leave alone the world where the percentage is way higher. And I'm sure some countries are very sensitive towards the inclusion piece, but in India, I'm sure there's still a long way to go. So, after you finished this experience or after you were working on this, you decided to pursue MBA program. Was entrepreneurship on your mind that inspired you to pursue something like this, or it was about impacting people at scale, so you decided to see if MBA can really help you do that?
Yeah, so the entrepreneurial journey started even before I went for my MBA.
Okay.
I learned, Pamela, that when you're trying to solve a problem nobody is solved for, entrepreneurship is the only answer.
Yes.
After CMC, my first job I took up and I joined an institution or like a startup, but in the non-profit space that was working to solve for inclusion and access for patients, or not patients, people who were wheelchair users for life. And it was run by a really phenomenal person, one of my mentors, who was a wheelchair user himself for the last 25 years. Since his time at IIM Bangalore, he was on a wheelchair. So he and his friends had set up this non-profit, sort of this idea of this non-profit, which I became one of the first employees to go in, structure, and then scale the initiatives. During my time at this first stint, I got an opportunity to travel across the country, meet people who were wheelchair users, but also their families, other healthcare professionals like myself, like I was at CMC, and these organizations that you talk about that are supposed to solve for inclusion. And I learned about the challenges. I learned what it takes to do this at scale. What are the challenges that are coming in the way of inclusion being delivered today? Like you said, there is theory around it, there are rules. But is it getting delivered? Not really. And what keeps it from getting delivered? It is not one person's responsibility, right? So I learned this in the process of sort of doing fundraisers for our national wheelchair basketball team. I worked with IIM Bangalore alumni to raise awareness among corporate leaders to see if they could hire people with disabilities into their own institutions, hire one or five and every year within your own organization. And I learned what it means to scale this impact. In the process, I developed some learnings that made me feel that if we were to do sustainable delivery of impact at scale, it has to be done the either the for profit or the sustainable route, but not in a non profit route. That is what at that time I could gather as a
Yes.
young girl. And to learn about what kind of business models can you build to deliver social impact with a sustainable business model is why I decided to go do an MBA. So the journey started before it, and then I went into a B school to learn what was being done in other sectors. My space was very niche. Nobody had heard about an institution solving for people who were wheelchair users. But it doesn't mean that people were not doing great work in the country. So I got a chance to study with other brilliant minds and professors who had experienced these business models of delivering sustainable, sustained impact at scale in models that were different from a pure nonprofit. And I wanted to absorb all of that and learn from that.
Wow, I can imagine how you transitioned. You were such a driven person, it looks like, because at every juncture of your career, you were so mindful of how can you bring about change. So that was driving you as a person. Now, before I move into, really asking you how your career transition unfolded from a healthcare professional into what you're doing in business and technology today, I'd like to check with you because maybe you're the right person. A lot of assisted technology for disabilities exist in the market today, but not all of it is affordable. Is affordability also a subject that people are looking at? Because the 3 or 4% population of India that has disabilities, maybe 60% of that is in rural India. And affordability is a very big question for them. So I'll give you an example. I was looking at a smart glove. My mom has some tremors because she has early Parkinson's
Right.
symptoms. And it is expensive. First thing, the availability in a country like India, you have to get it from somewhere else. And it does manage the tremors very well. But then, and she was talking to somebody back in her hometown. And the person who also has similar symptoms was asking, can she buy it as well? And my mom had to communicate that this is a very expensive device. Let me check with my daughter. So it kind of struck a chord, and I thought I'll check with you when we speak today in this conversation. Assisted devices, affordability, is that a subject or a problem anybody is solving for?
Yeah, no, definitely. If I were to tell you the science, like the science of the word accessibility, one of the three pillars there is actually affordability. Because you could
Hmm.
have a device right in front of you on Amazon or in the shop next to you, but if you can't afford to buy it sustainably,
Yeah,
then it is not accessible to you. So
correct.
that's one of the pillars. And yes, there are institutions solving for this. But the best way that I have learned that we can solve for affordability of a new technology is by driving utilization. So
Hmm.
when a technology proves that it works and it is being utilized by the market, there becomes a
Hmm.
demand. And then people are forced to either build it locally or import it or waive
Yes.
off the taxes to make it affordable for the audience. What your mom
Hmm.
is using is expensive probably because it's entirely built in the US and imported,
Correct.
right? So
It's
if
it's
there is
called gyro gear. I don't know if you have heard about it.
right. No, not this particular device, but there are many such tools that exist in other countries which would help patients in India, but either due to a lack of awareness among the therapists or the patients or just a general knowledge gap, these are not being utilized in India.
Hmm.
But imagine a future where every Parkinson's patient is recommended to use this if they need it.
Hmm.
There will be a drive to have to build this locally or to import it or sell it at a rate that is affordable. So utilization and awareness will lead to affordability of these assistive devices, and that's the gap that some organizations are trying to fill. But as you can imagine, it's an ecosystem change. One
Correct.
organization cannot do this. There has to be
Correct.
policy involvement apart from individual entrepreneurial interests from the ecosystem. So that's what it takes to solve for this.
Appreciate the answer. And this was a short detour from your transition story. Now, like, getting back to your career, you moved from being a healthcare professional, working in a non-profit, then got getting into your B school for your MBA, got some awards during that time for the impact you created for the cohort and your contribution to the school, and then business and technology. How all of this unfolded? What went on behind the scenes?
Yeah. So, to be honest, Pamela, I never stopped being a healthcare professional at heart. That's still who I am. What drives me every day are the stories that I heard in those villages, in those slums, in my hospital, in my rehab institute, the stories of illness, suffering, hope, healing, and change. That's what drives everything I do today, or I believe will continue to drive me in the future. So, I'm still that healthcare professional at heart, but the only thing I did through this transition or progression was I took my experience of one on one patient care to do it
Hmm.
for patients at scale. And in the process, I learned new skills and I learned that technology is the greatest enabler, it is the greatest leveler. So, what I did was I ensured that I looked for opportunities where I could bring in technology not just for healthcare delivery, but also then later for healthcare problem solving outside of the hospital. In my first effort in that nonprofit, I learned what it takes to manage a program, to
Hmm.
do anything outside of the hospital. What are the different players in the ecosystem in the process, what it takes to fund something like this and keep going. At ISB, I learned how people are doing this outside of the healthcare sector because there's definitely a lot to learn from there. At my next job, I worked with a corporate hospital chain trying to set up their rehab institute across different physical centers. So it was managing a for-profit healthcare institution, actually building a for-profit healthcare institution. That taught me the ins and outs of business management, of hiring a team, retaining a team, delivering patient care in different brick and mortar setups but at an equal quality. From there, I came into this job that I work today, which is a startup. We'll talk about that as we go. But here, what we are doing is delivering technology healthcare products to patients and to healthcare professionals completely outside of the hospital also. We are
Okay.
screening patients at scale who could have tuberculosis or could have lung cancer through tech products, through AI products. And this transition has taught me all of these things that technology could really solve for things at scale. So I went from an individual healthcare professional to somebody who delivered a healthcare institution to now taking it outside of the institution for patients at scale through the power of technology.
Very nice. And we'll discuss this a little more as we delve into your role at Qure.ai, where you work as a chief business officer today. But do you see that adoption of these technologies is also on the high, like it's increasing as we move along, or it is just the R&D part which is, really at its high and adoption is still low?
No, I think a lot has changed in the last 5 to 6 years, and I would say COVID has been a game changer for technology adoption in healthcare. R&D and products have been developed for many years and have been at different stages for different problems, but the adoption has really spiked since COVID, when we were forced to sort of go behind
Yes.
closed doors and still see patients in rural, remote areas. Simple technologies like teleconsultation that had existed for the longest time but were not being adopted
Yes.
suddenly were forced to get adopted, right? So I think technology adoption is on the high, and it's a wind of change that is here to stay. There's no going back.
So tell us a little more about your role at Qure.ai today. What does it involve? How do you see this role really creating the impact that you always dreamt of as a child?
Right. The Cure has been a wonderful institution. It's a healthcare startup that creates AI products and helps them deliver to patients for screening conditions that are both communicable and non communicable. So, conditions like tuberculosis, lung cancer, stroke, our products help screen and enable early diagnosis for patients across these cohorts. My role started out in the operations and client success team, where I established a large 25-member team across 5 continents, delivering these products to the last mile, making sure that our clients are able to use these new products that they have no idea about, that is not visible. This is not a technology you can touch and feel. It is AI. It's invisible. But my team helped hospitals and non-profits and community institutions use these technologies in their usual patient workflows to ensure that nothing is disrupted and a lot more patients can be reached. From there, I've now transitioned to this role where I head the neurology vertical. Our neurology products can help detect stroke in a matter of minutes. It can
Wow.
enable a faster diagnosis, a faster treatment, and as you may be aware, stroke, everything is about the time. Every second counts, brain cells die every second. So, technology products like ours that help in coordinating between different institutions and healthcare professionals that are involved in solving for this complex disease that is stroke. All of them come on a simple platform, a WhatsApp like platform. And both the AI and this simple tech platform work together to make sure that what took 10, 12, 24, 36 hours end to end for a patient from having a stroke to having their treatment has been reduced to like 4 hours or under, significantly changing patient outcomes. So I had that vertical working to find ways to scale this technology to not just the developed countries but also to the developing nations.
Wow, this is so inspirational, and this is so nice to hear firsthand from somebody who is at the cusp of business and tech. So, we learned a lot about how you are really driving the change for inclusion and accessibility for people with disabilities. I'm sure a lot has changed after COVID. The inequities had increased, and with institutions that you worked for before, a lot has been happening in the background. Now, tech has come into the picture. Now, let's repivot as we close this conversation to understand, as a woman navigating career changes, you've been through a lot, good, bad, and what advice would you give aspiring women who may consider shifting cities or professions to follow their calling?
Yeah, that's a question close to my heart. But the answer also is kind of in the question that you asked. It's about following your heart. My learning and my little piece of advice to all the women who are exploring not just transitions but progressions and change of cities, locations, or careers is to really try to sit back and understand themselves and understand what they truly like. If they know what they are passionate about, or even something that gives them pure joy, they don't even have to be very passionate about it. Doing what you truly enjoy or you truly like, and then working to growing to solve for everything that gets you to allows you to do that, that's what makes the difference. Transitions become easier, hard work becomes easy. You don't feel
Mhm.
like it's effort when you're chasing something that you truly enjoy. And then when you reach there, it is sweet, right? You get to do what you love and you get to either create an impact or just enjoy your life and make it meaningful. So my advice to women out there who are in that journey themselves is to first figure out what they truly like. And then,
Mhm.
second, also go out and speak to other people who've done this, either the exact thing before or have taken these difficult decisions and have transitioned so that they can learn from their journeys. Because it's always easier when you do it as a community and not alone, because there are a lot of people out there to help you. So that's sort of my little bit of advice to women who are exploring such change.
When you just said, do what you enjoy, do where you find joy, I was just reflecting on this conversation. This is what I enjoy. And, when I started off to do this podcast, this is the 17th episode, I think. I had no idea on how to do this. And as you said, the power of community. I went on, leaned on to a lot of people who have done it before and learned from them on what are the frugal approaches of doing it. I exactly followed the template that you just mentioned. And here I am. When I started, I thought I'll barely be able to complete 10 episodes, but I'm going strong. And, I have so many stories that I have yet to cover. I'm still so excited because every story uncovers a new learning for me. So before I was trying to talk to you, I did some research on disabilities, which I would not have otherwise done. So this is giving me so much joy, because I'm liking what I'm doing and I'm putting in that effort that is required to make it happen. So your advice is bang on, and I'm sure people listening to the podcast, especially women, would find this relatable, and some of them would come out and pursue things that they would like. The biggest challenge is identifying your calling, which you also said that try to identify what you enjoy. I took a lot of time to identify my calling. While I love tech, I also love doing this, so I'm doing it in parallel. But I'm sure people will benefit from this advice. It was so nice to have you on the show, Anumeha, and I appreciate this time. I know you are a young mother, and I'd let you go back to your baby. And it was a pleasure talking to you, pleasure learning all that I learned from you today. And I'm sure A lot of people would be inspired from this conversation to pursue something entrepreneurial in the space that we just spoke about.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Pamela. It was, like I said, a pleasure talking to you. But before we wrap up, I would like to wish you the very best. I think what you're doing is brilliant. It flows naturally, so you're a great host. And I hope you reach your 100th episode and more, and I get re-invited in another decade to tell my story again.
Absolutely. Your story will evolve in the next few
Absolutely.
months and years, and we'll have a different story, a different path to pursue. And we have so many topics that as women we can talk about,
Yes.
uplift the community, and support each other.
Yes. Not just the women's community, but especially, like you said, of young mothers
Yes.
treading into their careers.
Yes.
Absolutely. All the
Yeah.
very best, Pamela. Really
Yeah.
happy to speak to you and to be on this podcast. Wishing a lot of brilliant minds get invited here. And I keep this as my favorite weekend here.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.